stories are something that I think stir the human spirit. And so today we have someone who has been doing this as a profession for 20 years.
I don't know how my parents managed it, but they sort of created a sense of confidence. And I was never stressed if I was going into a new space with different people.
They did some survey in the US where out of the top 5 things that people fear the most, and terrorism and whatnot, public speaking was one of them. What is it about confidence that you think is still far-fetched for humanity?
Yeah, look, I think it comes through. But you know what? I had a period in my life, it went for about 3 or 4 years, and it happened just before COVID, and then, and that was a period of anxiety. It was the weirdest thing. I went to give a presentation, it was actually at IBM, and I had all these people in the room who I didn't know, and anyway, I opened up, and I actually burst into tears. And it came out of nowhere, Akash. I couldn't understand what was going on.
How did you come out of that state, Shawn? Because it can be really moving for someone who's been on the stage and who thrives almost on a stage to sense that moment, the one that you shared about. So what was the process there?
I freaked out at first because I thought, oh my God, my livelihood is in danger here.
It's fascinating, and I don't think we know enough of the human mind and how the human body really operates to go through these phases in everyone's life. And if anyone feels that someone else in the world is born perfect and their journey is perfect, I think that's the biggest, I would say, the myth that we would be operating with. Yeah. Is there a story from your growing up that you feel just you vividly remember and you'd love to share it here with our audience, and whatever that lesson might be, but just a story that is worth sharing?
This is a story, I don't even know why I'm picking this story. It certainly doesn't shine a very nice light on myself.
From wherever you come in this world, wherever you're listening in the US or in Australia or in India, if there's one thing, or maybe let me say 2 things that connect humanity. I think the first one to me is food, and then the second one is stories. Stories are something that I think stir the human spirit. And so today we have someone who has been doing this as a profession for 20 years, Shawn. I read on the LinkedIn bio as I was stalking you, 20 years helping people learn what stories mean. Welcome, Shawn. Looking forward to this conversation with you.
Thank you, Akash. It's tremendous to be here. I'm very excited to have our conversation.
Absolutely. Look forward to the next 60 minutes. And Shawn, the bookends that we use to kind of kick off the podcast, the first question that we start off with, if that 8-year-old Shawn, that little boy, wherever he was growing up, parents, I don't know, siblings, friends, whatever that environment looked like, if that 8-year-old Shawn were to come and meet this Shawn right now, with those beautiful gray hair and the beard, what kind of a conversation do you think will emerge?
I think the 8-year-old Shawn would be kind of surprised as to the sort of things that I've done in my career. I remember when I was 8 years old, the sort of 2 things I was very interested in, as I was thinking, what would a job be? When you have those little glimmers of thought when you're 8 years old, it doesn't happen very often. But the sort of job I thought would be cool to have would be to be an international courier. Someone who carried an attaché bag with the sort of strap around your arm, so high security. You take it from embassy to embassy. So I must admit, I must have been thinking even back then that travel would be a big part of my life. So that would be something we would connect on, because my career's definitely had a lot of travel. But the other thing I just loved when I was 8 years old was going out into, well, we call it the bush here in Australia, right? Mm-hmm. And with my father, and he was a Boy Scout in the US, so he'd teach me all the tricks of being out in the bush and tying knots and lighting fires and all that sort of lovely things that 8-year-old boys absolutely enjoy. So yeah, we would talk about that because I still do that today. I get out and like just last year, I walked 270 kilometres up the coast of Portugal and into Spain as part of the Camino, which is a very famous walk. And yeah, just whenever I get an opportunity to get out in the wild, I take it. So, yeah, I think that would be the conversation.
Fascinating, fascinating. What is it about travel? What is it about? It's almost I'm hearing a sense of adventure there, Sean. So, what is it about adventure and travel that you think that 8-year-old and the current Sean connect on?
Well, I don't know how my parents managed it, but they sort of created a sense of confidence, and and I was never stressed if I was going into a new space with different people, and I must admit, I instead of getting anxious about that, I actually get invigorated by it,
Hmm.
right? And I tell my kids now, there's a few things that have helped me. Like, for example, airports can be highly stressful. I say to my kids, who, by the way, in their 30s, I say to them, look, you have to have a mindset of airport time. And it's like you go into a different world. And once you go into that world, you can't be stressed by whatever happens. Whatever happens, happens. I don't know. It's just those sort of things. I'm sure my father gave me that sort of resilience, if you like, an attitude to, travel and facing complex and messy things. So I think that would be one thing that I drew from that,
That's
most
very
definitely.
interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. We will talk more about the airport mindset because I have my experiences and no one around me fully understands that. So maybe that's something that you and I will connect on today. But this sense of confidence, I think it's a big word, Sean, because I've seen coaches in their 30s and 20s and 40s even come to me and have these conversations around like Utkarsh, how hard it is to be confident in a certain situation. And I think reading some research. They did some survey in the US where out of the top 5 things that people fear the most, and terrorism and whatnot, public speaking was one of them. So what is it about? Maybe let's start with confidence and then we'll move into public speaking. What is it about confidence that you think is still far fetched for humanity?
Yeah, look, I think it comes through repeated experience. And I think starting conditions are really important, right? So, when you're young and you have situations where you're brought into a place where, you have to perform in some way. It could be the smallest thing. It could be, like my father was big into me shaking hands with other people, right? And for a little kid, that could be a bit daunting,
Yeah.
right? Because all his friends were very accommodating and they loved it, and it was a simple thing, it just became a normal thing, So, of course, they're all much taller than me, very important people in my mind. And all of a sudden, I kind of realised as a pretty young person that, I know, people are people, and once you've got that, I think that is the stepping stone. Because then, when you're, you know, giving a presentation at work, for example, the mindset is, people are people. I mean, last night I was doing some work for an executive team in Africa. So there was 10 people there, all at the top of their game, running a company of 7,000 people. And I sort of just had that mindset, you know, people are people, and, I've got things to help them and they're going to help me understand. And with that attitude, sort of their nerves, sort of disappear and dissipate, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. And whereas if you have the opposite introduction, right, where you're told to stand back, you're told to, be quiet, or, those sort of things, I think, as parents, these are the things that we can help our children with, is give them experience where they get opportunity to be confident, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no manual to parenting. That's the tough thing about it, right? But I think what you're sharing is, and I often say this on the podcast. I mean, I think every episode that people
Yes.
should sit down with a diary and a pen, because this statement, it sounds extremely simple that people are people. But if you start to operate with that mindset, it could unlock a lot for everyone, Sean.
Yes, yeah. But you know what? I had a period in my life, it went for about 3 or 4 years, and it happened just before COVID. And then, and that was a period of anxiety. Like, it was the weirdest thing. I went to give a presentation, it was actually at IBM, and I had all these people in the room who I didn't know. And anyway, I opened up and I actually burst into tears. And it came out of nowhere, Akash. I couldn't understand what was going on. I was, in retrospect, I discovered I was having an anxiety attack, right? Now that continued, I don't know, for probably 3 years. I couldn't work out why.
Wow.
And as till this day, I can't really. So when people say they do get nervous or have anxiety, I have a different appreciation that it's not a rational thing, right? You can't just step through it and go, "Oh, you need to do X, Y, and Z." Bam, you'll sort it out, because it doesn't quite work that way. But I think the way I was kind of lucky that COVID came, because it forced me to be away from people for a period of time. I think it was a stress level thing. I'm not sure, So yeah, it's more complex than what we probably sound like we're suggesting, but
Yeah, yeah.
understanding that is important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then how did you come out of that state, Sean? Because it can be really moving for someone who's been on the stage and who thrives almost on a stage to sense that moment, the one that you shared about. So what was the process there?
Well, it was kind of mysterious to me, because I freaked out at first, because I thought, oh my God, my livelihood is in danger here. Like, this is what I do. I stand on stage and, and do this type of thing. I got some help from a friend who was a coach, and he just helped me, gave me some techniques. It helped a lot, and I was doing a lot of meditating. That was something that helped, but it didn't take it away. But I was in a situation where I had to do it. I had to face into it, and I just learnt to cope. And then I noticed just one day the feeling had gone, and so it sort of just sat at a different one level and then just fell away.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even tell you why. I couldn't even tell you why it disappeared then. But, as anything in life, you make up a story to explain it, right? So, my story is that COVID let me, rest a little bit, and I got back on board and I was okay. So anyway, we don't know for sure.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I don't think we know enough of the human mind and how the human body really operates to go through these phases in everyone's life. And if anyone feels that someone else in the world is born perfect and their journey is perfect, I think that's the biggest, I would say, the myth that we would be operating with.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Everyone's got their things they're dealing with, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Coming back to the airport mindset. So my take on that is, I think what you were saying to me, that if I'm traveling alone and for work, to me that's Zen space. Like, I love my flight time because there's no internet, there's no connectivity, so I'm like in my own zone. So I like, how do you feel about the airport mindset?
Well, my mindset is really around that anything could go wrong, but that's how life works in an airport. I remember, arriving in a airport in Kenya, and the whole, sort of foyer of the airport was just jam-packed full of people. Like, you couldn't get anywhere near where you were supposed to check in. And apparently the systems had gone down. And so I just, got into one of the lines and I just waited, and I think, oh, well, this is just airport time, things will get sorted out. It took ages, but eventually got through the system. But if you were to get all concerned and worried and think everything has to run on time and run the way you expect, I think you would be in quite a state. So there's that. And the other thing is that I'm lucky that often when my customers are sending me places, they send me business class. But when I'm travelling in economy class, usually when I'm on my own holidays, right, is that I jump into the seat and I say to myself, this is silly, really silly, but I sort of say, this is my little room, okay? I've got everything, everything's just with an arm's distance away, everything's right here for me. And I settle in and I more or less say, I love this. I love this.
Yeah.
Instead of fighting it. Like, if you jump in and you fight it, you have a miserable trip, right?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you one other area in which this works for travelling, right? And my wife just can't believe it. So when we've been together for many, many years, and so in our 20s we travelled around Europe, and we'd be in youth hostels, etc. And in the youth hostel, of course, you're sleeping together with sometimes it's a whole bunch of men that you're sleeping with, and sometimes it's co-ed. But snoring, right? can be just on the next level.
Yeah.
And I managed to teach myself in those early days to love snoring, right? So when someone started snoring, I'd go, oh, gee, I love that sound. That is so relaxing. That's so relaxing. And I would go to sleep. Whereas everyone else would be, cursing that person for
Yeah.
soaring down another tree, the way they snore. So that's kept me in such good stead, right? It means I can sleep practically anywhere, which is tremendous.
Yeah, it's a gift. It is
A
a
gift,
gift.
that's right, a
I
gift.
agree. My wife does not sleep well on airplanes, so she's like, "You sit in the craft and then you're gone. What happens?" I'm like, "I sleep so well on the airplanes." Yeah, sleeping anywhere is definitely a gift. And so maybe as we were speaking about everything, part of me like wanted to just kind of put forth a challenge, and it's okay for you to decline this at any moment. So before we move on to how that 8-year-old grew up and when did stories kind of emerge into your life,
Yeah.
is there a story from your growing up that you feel just you vividly remember and you'd love to share here with our audience, and whatever that lesson might be, but just a story that is worth sharing? What is it about stories that make it hard for people to actually share them? Why don't people more naturally tell stories even when we've grown up with them?
I think part of it is, a lot of stories require some level of vulnerability to be shown. And I think there are some organisations where you look around and there's no models of behaviour to replicate. And that makes it really tough to be the first one. You don't want to be the first one, right?
Yeah.
The interesting thing too is that I think people put too much emphasis on the word story. A story from my younger days, is that what you mean?
Yes.
Well, this is a story. I don't even know why I'm picking this story. It certainly doesn't shine a very nice light on myself. But when I was in high school, I was the first person to get a car. I was a little bit older than everyone else, and I got a car I bought for $100. And it was a Holden station wagon, a HD Holden it was called. And because it was a station wagon, I would take all my friends to, we'd go to the movies and do things, and they would pile into this car, and we could fit 12 people into this car. It was like a clown car, really. And I remember one night we decided to go to the movies. This is in Canberra, and on the way home I was dropping everyone off, and they had bench seats back then in the front of the car. And so in the front we had myself driving, a friend, and another friend right at the window. And so she had to get out to let my friend out. And before she jumped in, I thought it'd be funny to drive off a little bit. So she had to, chase the car. And anyway, I drove off and I noticed she was chasing the car, and everyone thought it was really funny. And as I was driving, she was still running with the car. And eventually I stopped, and it turned out her finger was caught in the door, right? And it was her middle finger was caught in the door. Well, her and I both turned 60, and just the other night I took her out for dinner with my wife and her husband, and she still reminds me of that. And still because her cuticle didn't quite form correctly as a result, and she keeps reminding me of that incident.
Wow.
Now, it's a terrible story, but it's one that just popped into my mind. I think it's because we had dinner with them just the other night.
Yeah. That's the good thing about having the podcast completely unscripted, right? Because then how would we know that you have a friend whose middle finger got injured because you were driving the car? Fascinating. As you were thinking about and sharing about the car, I had a small car when I was in uni back home in India. It was there's this company in India which is, popular across the world, but Maruti, and I had like a red color Maruti 800, right? So
Right.
it's a very small compact car. If you try and fit more than 5 people, then it'll be hard for the car to really move, that kind of a small car. And on the back of that car, on the back windshield, I had written, "When I grow up, I'll be a Mercedes." And that was such a laughing riot for the whole uni, because everyone knew, oh, this is Utkarsh's car. He's going to grow up and be a Mercedes. So still waiting for that. But as that 8-year-old Shawn grew up, went through and was the first person to own a car in his high school, When did stories fall upon you and on your journey, Shawn?
Well, I mean, stories as a very explicit thing happened when I was working in IBM. So I was part of a research group that was called the Cynefin Centre for Organisational Complexity. It's quite a mouthful. And it was led by a gentleman called Dave Snowden, who's got a big reputation in the field of complexity. But he was a phenomenal storyteller. Like, this guy was so good at telling stories. And I remember, inviting him to. He lived in Wales, and I invited him to Australia to, sort of meet my customers. And so we organised sort of an event at Old Parliament House, and he arrived pretty much just with his suitcase. He'd just flown in that morning, and got himself organised. But I asked him, "Do you want to, something to show you PowerPoint or anything like that?" Yes. PowerPoint? No. It was a whole day workshop. And he said, no, give me a flip chart. And I said, okay. So I found a flip chart for him. And I tell you, I had 100 people in that room. He told stories. He obviously had activities. And he engaged those. They were sitting on the edge of their seat throughout the whole experience. And I must admit, right at the end of that, I thought to myself, that's what I want to do. I want to do that. I want to have his job. And so we became great friends, and I actually, on the day, I wrote a story. I was doing some work at the tax office, and I wrote this story about them, our team, sent it to him, and a couple of days later, he said to me, "Shawn, thanks for the story, but you totally got the wrong idea." And I went, "What?" He said, yeah, I'm not interested in written stories. I'm interested in stories that are told orally in organisations, because they're quite different to written. We had this big conversation about written versus oral stories. Yeah. And it really set me on this path of focusing on oral stories. It was a great lesson in that first couple of days. So that's where I got started. But then after I kicked off in that space, I realised I was actually doing storytelling previously. Like, my first business was a business to write guidebooks for national parks. And my business partner and dear friend, Peter Fox, we thought it would be cool to have a job where you get paid by going bushwalking. It's going back to the bushwalking days, right? Which we did. We went to all these national parks, we wrote the guidebooks, but when we wrote proposals, he was my business partner, beautiful writer, but he would ask me questions that would get us to tell stories, and we'd put these stories in our proposals. We had like 100% hit rate, on our proposals. It was maybe because no one else was doing it at the time. There might be other reasons, but part of it, I think, was because he was such a good storyteller, and so we sort of combined nicely in that area. So yeah, probably been doing it for longer than I imagined.
Beautiful. And let's probably take two different parts here and start with the first one. The stories and the storyteller. I'm interested in learning more about both through your experience. Yeah. What is it about stories, Shawn, that just, to me also, they kind of stir the spirit, as I was saying in the introduction. But what is it about stories that make it hard for people to actually share them? Because I see a lot of people and I always try and play the devil's advocate here. Yeah. I see a lot of people not being able to fully do that. They feel data is where it lies, or it's the numbers game, at least in the corporate world. So yes. Why don't people more naturally tell stories, even when we've grown up with them? What is it about stories, Shawn, that we should put them into practice in our own world, whatever that world looks like?
Actually, the best way to have someone remember something is get them to do something, like their own experience, especially something scary, something that creates an emotion is something unforgettable. But if you can't do that, the second best thing is to share a story. You can only beat a story with a better story. And one of the great things about good storytelling is it often has dialogue in it.
What have you seen as the biggest kind of limiting belief or a blocker that you've seen in leaders that this still, after speaking with you, after listening to the stories, they're still not on the other side yet? And how do you navigate that with them?
I wrote a one-pager, which sort of had like 6 little steps to starting your business storytelling journey, right? And the first thing that I wrote was, you have to believe you're a storyteller. So when I'm 80, I want to help people recreate that experience, just being immersed in stories. Yeah. Well, I think part of it is, a lot of stories require some level of vulnerability to be shown. Like the story of me, driving around in my car and catching my friend's finger in the door. I mean, it sort of gives some sort of impression of the person. So there's that. The other thing too is it's to do with social proof. In other words, what is everyone else doing around here, right? Just the other week, I was interviewing people who've come along to our story programs, and they all came from one company called Mars. Anyway, I had about 6 or 7 people to interview, and one lady said to me, I said, because I always ask her, so do you see any leaders around you who share stories? And she said, I don't think there's really anyone that I see who shares a story in my area. Whereas all the others had like models of behaviour that they could follow, right? And I think there are some organisations where you look around and there's no models of behaviour to replicate. And that makes it really tough to be the first one. You don't want to be the first one, right?
Yeah.
So, in fact, when I talk to people who want to do our programs, sometimes they'll say to me, Shawn, what I want to do is I want to take one person from this division, one person from that division, one from this division, and one from that division. And we'll get them all in on the program. And I say, no, that's not a great idea, because they're going to go back to their division and they're going to be the only one, right? They're going to feel isolated, and they're not going to feel like they've got a little, sort of group to work with. It's much better to take a division and get a cohort out of the division, and then go to the next division and get a cohort. So just these little, it's almost like the environmental construct that you need to help storytelling grow, right? So yeah, I would say, vulnerability is one. The interesting thing too is that I think people put too much emphasis on the word story. I would prefer, and this is what I do with most of my customers, I don't talk that much about stories, especially if I sense that they're a little bit frightened by them. I talk about examples. Now, no one has any problems with an example. Right? So, Utkarsh, give me an example of where that worked. Well, I'll tell you what, Shawn, I have an example for you. 3 days, you'll tell a story, right? I mean, it's just, but they're okay with telling examples, and people love examples, right? They love it. It makes perfect sense to share an example.
Yeah. Very relatable, because I think what happens is, as soon as someone says, can you share a story, then there's pressure, because you want your story to land in the right place, have that hero's journey, have the right words, the emotion, and all that pressure comes in. And as soon as you shift it to an example, it's just, I'm sharing
It's
something.
an example.
It's just an example. Wow, that's brilliant. Yeah, you were saying something.
So a simple thing like that. Stories do freak people out, and I'm big against the hero's journey and that sort of storytelling. I'm into everyday storytelling. What happened 2 weeks ago? What happened yesterday? What did you see on TV last night? Those sort of things make for great little stories to help you make business points. And good leaders just know how to do this on a very ongoing and consistent basis, right? Yeah.
I think what is also lacking, maybe, Shawn, is, and I love your perspective on this, is the patience to listen to the other person. Because sometimes I feel as soon as someone's taking the time to share that example or story, there's an impatient person on the other end who's waiting for that to end and to then respond. Do you see that happen as well?
It can happen, but there is a social contract that we have when someone starts a story, which is you have to wait until they finish. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't create tension, and you can reduce that tension by prefacing your story with your point, right? So if you sort of start your response by saying, so I've learned something really important about how we can talk to our customers. Actually, just 2 days ago, I was out with Mars and ... tell the story. Now, you'll be more interested in that than if I just jumped in and said, okay, actually 2 days ago you go, well, why am I hearing this story? I don't understand. And you want to jump in, right? But if you know that you're going to learn a lesson, right, how to deal with customers, and let's say customers are important to you as well, then you will be quite okay. Now, doesn't mean you can get away with telling a 10-minute story. It still has to be a 90-second story, right? You'll be lucky to get more than, sort of 2 minutes, but 90 seconds, even shorter. And by the way, if you ever want to see a storytelling par excellence, in the business world, have a look at Brené Brown's Netflix special. Guess how many stories she can tell? I think it's she has about 75-minute presentation. How many stories do you think someone can tell in 75 minutes? What would your guess? 12 stories? Yeah, 12. That's pretty good. She tells 46 stories.
Wow.
Right? Wow. So if people say, oh, we don't have time for a story, I just point them to that and say, come on, if Brené Brown can get 46 stories in 75 minutes and she's like a rock god in terms of, the sort of things she conveys, you can do that too. You can do 10 in your presentation. You don't have to do 46, but you can do 10.
Amazing. And it's on Netflix.
Netflix. I think it's... the title has the word courage in the title.
Got it.
I can remember that.
I was seeing my wife watch it. I did not pay full attention, but I should.
Well, you should watch it and count the stories. Her shortest story is 7 seconds.
That's a great challenge to have 7 seconds.
That's it, a 7-second story.
Wow. That's what do you say in 7 seconds?
Well, what she did was she walks out on stage and the first thing she says is something like, so the security guard wanted to take my purse. No one takes the Texan's purse, right? So we learn a little bit about Brené. You learn she's from Texas. You learn she's a feisty woman. She's not going to let the security guard take her purse. In 7 seconds, she conveys a lot about who she is, right? It's what I call a connection story.
Beautiful.
She tells lots of connection stories.
Beautiful. That is so powerful. Let's then get into, so if they're sitting some in our audience, the naysayers, that they don't still feel like they want to kind of incline towards using the word example or even stories. What is it about stories, Shawn, that we should put them into practice in our own world, whatever that world looks like?
Well, I mean, the sort of logical element of it is they're memorable, right? The estimation is about they're 7 times more memorable than facts alone. So if you want someone to remember something, actually the best way to have someone remember something is get them to do something, like their own experience, especially something scary, something that creates an emotion is something unforgettable. But if you can't do that, the second best thing is to share a story. So it's vicarious experience, right? And especially if the story has some meaning to them, right? Like if I had to share a story about, plumbing supplies, that may not, hit your button, right? But if I told you, an amazing story about coaching and, just how someone could turn that around in a very short period of time, I suspect you would remember that because it's meaningful for you, right? Now, if you've got listeners who really are data-oriented, the best presentation of data, and because everyone's talking about insight at the moment, right? This is the big word. You've got to have an insight. Well, one of my sort of psychology friends, a guy called Gary Klein, he made a really nice observation. He said, insight is when you unexpectedly come to a better story, right? So you think about when you're presenting your data, your audience already has a story in their head about how, whatever phenomena you're looking at, they have a story in their head about how that works, right? You're trying to help them get a new story in their head. And it turns out you can't beat a story with just facts. You can only beat a story with a better story. So if you're not presenting your data in a narrative, you're not cutting through, right? You're not giving them the opportunity for them to replace their old story with a new story, right? So there's just a couple of things. I mean, there's a myriad of reasons why storytelling has an impact. But I'm not saying that people should just tell all stories. That would be crazy, right?
Yeah,
But you should get 20 or 30% in. That would be
absolutely.
a great impact if you did that.
Yeah, don't try and do 46 stories in 30 minutes. That won't work.
No, don't jump there. Don't go to Brené
Yeah,
Brown level
yeah,
to start with. I think
absolutely.
build
Absolutely.
up to it. Build up
Build
to
up
it.
to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I love so the story needs to be memorable. It needs to have meaning, and then the insight is that a story can be beaten with a better story. And so, how do you come up with that insight through a story is also what's kind of really powerful here. And this Brené Brown, I'm going to watch this series because I think to hear to just even open up to the idea of using a 7-second story to tell so much about yourself. I think it's a powerful idea.
Yes, it is. And and she tells. What I love about her technique is that she tells everyday stories.
Yeah.
She'll sort of say, so I was in an aeroplane and the fellow next to me turned to me and said, hey, Brené, what do you do? And one of the great things about good storytelling is it often has dialogue in it, like this person said this and this person said that. We love dialogue because it actually brings the listener in to a point where they feel like they're watching the conversation. Right? So it makes it quite intimate. This is why songwriters do this quite often. If you listen to Paul Kelly, for example, great Australian songwriter, he'll tell stories like that, and it'll be the voice of the characters actually saying things to their wife, to their kids, And this is just one of the tricks, if you like, to good storytelling.
Yeah.
Is dialogue. So, yeah, I think all these things, you can learn through, okay, I need to do X, Y, and Z, but the better way to learn is just to go back to sharing examples.
Correct.
And then if you want to make your stories better, you got to make them visual. Right? A visual, like you think of again back to my, car experience with my friend. Could you see her sort of running next to the car, right? Could you sort of imagine her finger getting caught in the door? And actually, it feels awful, right?
Yeah.
And because it feels awful, you're more likely to remember that story, right? Because it has an emotion. And it turns out, actually, the emotion of disgust is one of the biggest predictors of whether a story gets retold.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
So, if you can tell some good, disgusting stories...
I'm gonna find some.
Find
it's
some.
amazing how the human mind operates. Disgust to be on the top is very interesting.
Oh, there's a good reason for it because from an evolutionary perspective, it was always a good thing to avoid, disgusting things, bodily fluids, sores, wounds. All these things were disease carriers, and so as a species, we've learnt keep away, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting in modern times is that concept of disgust has moved into things like behaviour of a CEO. So a behaviour of a CEO could become disgusting because the way they treat their people or, what sort of they do in the workplace. So it's morphed over time and it's got broader away from that physical element, but still disgust.
Correct. Yeah. A lot of our experiences have like a tiger's not going to come and eat us, but a boss might shout at us, and that is what's going to trigger our amygdala. So I think we've made even our experiences extremely concrete. Not many now walk into the bush and try and map out the national parks of Australia. So
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. If we were to now move into, or maybe even before we move, is there another story that comes to mind of your days at IBM, of your days of when you initially started to become this storyteller to the world? Because I'm going to now remember the car story forever. So maybe there are a couple of more I can get out from you that'll be worth remembering.
Yeah, sure. Well, the one that just pops to mind, it was one of those situations of how to navigate a large organisation, so with a big hierarchy, etc. And I remember, I was a middle-level sort of manager, leader in the organisation, lots of vice presidents above me, right? And I had a situation with a customer where the customer wanted to do something which I thought was fair, fair and reasonable, but my boss didn't want them to do it, right? And I had this real tension, like, do I do what my boss wants me to do, or do I do what my customer wants me to do? So I found myself, just by accident, I went to a presentation. There was a whole bunch of IBMers there. And I was standing next to a vice president, a very senior person. And I turned to him and I sort of said, this is my dilemma. And he said, Shawn, I tell you what, you just do what your customer wants. You will get wrapped over the knuckles for it. But as that goes up the chain, you'll discover all those people who've gone up the hierarchy did exactly what you did. And you'll be fine. And I did that. And it more or less worked exactly how he predicted. And it was a great insight into the culture underlying in that organisation. Because it comes down, one of the questions I always love to ask in a company is, how do you get ahead around here? Right? Do you get ahead by helping the customer, in which case that was the case, or what else? And this is an indicator of culture, right? So,
it's a powerful question. How do you get ahead in the organization?
Yeah, it reveals a lot, actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it reveals the underside, the dark side of organisations, because, you have all the values on the wall and you have the performance metrics, etc. But that means nothing compared to how you actually get ahead. Often it's because you made good sales, or the right people, and it's kind of interesting when you work that out.
Interesting. It's a beautiful question to kind of ponder upon. How do you get ahead in the organization, and so many elements can emerge out of that. But now, as we go through this idea of stories, and we've spoken on both sides, between the story and the storyteller, who's more important, Shawn?
Well, they're sort of symbiotic, aren't they? One can't go without the other. In fact, there's a third element, and that is the audience. And especially when you're oral storytelling, because you're getting this immediate feedback from your audience. So the storyteller gets to choose the story, gets to decide, do they tell the long version or the short version? Do they emphasise this versus emphasise that? There's a whole bunch of sort of implicit decisions that the storyteller is making. But some of those are influenced by what's happening on the spot, the response they're getting from the audience, right? So I know I've been in situations where sometimes you're sharing a story and you're getting all this encouragement, right? And they want to know more, and they'll even ask you questions in the middle of the story. But how did that happen? Or what happens next? And you've got this expansive opportunity. It's where you can tell the longer story. But the opposite end of the spectrum is when I stupidly told a story once about mulesing, which is what farmers do with their sheep. They have to more or less, with the back of the sheep, sort of cut the backs of these sheep off. It's quite a dramatic sort of activity. And I was telling it because I'd seen this story on Dirty Jobs, I think it was. And I thought, it was something to do with the lesson they were learning. But as I started, the whole audience just closed down. I realised there was a bunch of people. This was a really confronting story for them, right? But the thing about a story, it's really hard to you can't stop. You can't just go, okay, I'm not going to tell you that story. Because even then they want to know what the end is.
Correct.
So you have to crunch it down and tell the shortest version and get out of there as fast as you can. Yeah, so there's some really interesting dynamics that are going on between storytelling, the storyteller and the audience.
Yeah. It's a beautiful triad that we've formed. What have you seen as the biggest kind of limiting belief or a blocker that you've seen in leaders that they just still, after speaking with you, after listening to the stories, they're still not on the other side yet? And how do you navigate that with them?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had one of these not too long ago. I was coaching a group of people that'd done our program, and I got them to do an activity. They had a month to do it, right? And the activity was simply I want you in the workplace to spot someone else telling a story. Okay? Very simple.
Right.
Anyway, out of the 12 people who are in the group, 11 of them, no worries. Got to the 12th person and she said, Shawn, quite frankly, I've been too busy to spot a story. I went, too busy? Really? All you have to do is look around you and,
Yeah.
you know. But what she was really saying, I think, is that she still felt some anxiety about what it was. She hadn't quite. And anyway, it was really nice. What happened is her colleagues helped her. And they sort of said, no, Angela, you were doing the sort of the onboarding the other day. And do you remember when the leader said, she went, oh, yeah, that's yeah, you saying that? Oh, yeah, that's a story. Yeah, you're right. Anyway, eventually she clicked into it, but it was obviously some little blocker that she had that she felt. In fact, in response to that, I wrote a one-pager, which sort of had like 6 little steps to starting your business storytelling journey, right? And the first thing that I wrote was, you have to believe you're a storyteller,
Yeah.
right? So it comes from identity, comes from, and it turns out that we're all storytellers, right? Even the people who, even the hardest nosed number crunching, engineer, or that, when they go down to the cafe with their friends, they're not sitting there going, so, Utash, we've got 4 key things I want to talk about. No, they're not doing dot points. They're not bringing up a chart. They're saying what they did on the weekend, right? They're telling stories. So we do it all the time. It's a matter of just getting them to click in from that natural habit they all have into how to use it in a business.
Love how everything comes from within. It's almost like unless you identify yourself as a story, even though you're doing it, but it has to emerge into your awareness. That's what.
Yes, it has to get into the awareness. I tell you, I'd be very happy to send you that one page, and you can share it with your audience if you like.
Absolutely, let's do that. We'll put the link in the show notes for them to look at.
Yeah, they might get some ideas on how to get started.
Absolutely. So as now you go through the stories and being the storyteller, if we were to take you a few decades forward, Shawn, and there comes a moment when you're 80 years old.
Okay.
And if that 80-year-old Shawn were to come and meet you right now, what do you think the advice would be from him?
It's interesting you ask that question, because a couple of nights ago, a dear friend of mine over in Cambridge, we were online talking about how people learn. And I said, and it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on this. So I said to him, so what's the way in which if you need to know how to do something, how do you go about doing it? Do you do a course? He said, Shawn, I've never done a course. I don't do a course in anything, right? And I said, it's so interesting. I've just got a new puppy, right? Little Winnie. Winnie's 5 months old now.
Right.
Well, I didn't do a course. I got onto YouTube, found this channel called McCann Dogs, and it tells you everything you need to know to train a puppy, right? More than you need to know. It's like every little sort of trick and tip is there.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested in how people learn without formal training, right? How do you immerse yourself in stories? And the reason I'm interested in this is because, I know, probably 5 years ago, I bumped into this leader who stood in front of about 500 people of his people and gave this great sort of presentation, no slides or anything, just talking to his people. They were hanging off everything he said. He was funny, he was interesting, had some really important points he was making, told lots of stories. Anyway, he comes off the stage, and I've got to go up on stage after him, got about 10 minutes before I go up. And I say to him, where'd you learn your storytelling? And he's just looked at me like, what? He didn't even know he told a story, right? It just didn't even, he was a natural storyteller. So it got me interested. How do you become a natural storyteller, right? I think people become natural storytellers because they're been immersed in stories. Their family tells stories. Their like they're from Ireland, and there's the pub culture of having a crack, as they call it, is
Yeah.
storytelling, and there are other people who just haven't had that experience so much. Now, how do you recreate that? So when I'm 80, I want to help people recreate that experience of just being immersed in stories. No formal training, nothing about you need to do this followed by this followed by that. Just hearing stories, appreciating stories, marveling at how stories work. That's all you need to do to become a better story. This is my proposition.
Yeah. Yeah. So if say that happens at 80, what would be the advice of 80-year-old Shawn to the current Shawn? What should you start doing right now to achieve
He
that?
would say, give up on your current career, Shawn, and go create a not-for-profit and just do this to your 80 because it's going to make you very happy. I think that's what he would say.
Powerful.
And mind you, I am actually got one foot in that direction. I'm sort of doing both things. My business partner would probably be absolutely aghast at the idea
Yeah.
that I'm sort of suggesting that we, sort of just throw in all of the training element. But I am a big believer in it's through experience, it's through trying stuff out, it's through appreciation, and it's through building a love for something, right? That's where you really learn, and that's what gives you the motivation. So that's an interesting question. I'm glad you asked that. It's now got me on a new career path already. Damn it.
Beautiful. In this one short sentence, and I think people should rewind it, and I'm going to go back and listen. I think you give a great summary of how do you really learn, because you need to find the joy in it. You got to experience and immerse yourself in it, and you got to find that inner curiosity to be able to pick that skill up. I think, and this idea, Shawn, of immersing people into storytelling, I think it's brilliant. I can almost imagine a fire right in the middle, and people sitting in a circle around that fire and just sharing stories.
Continuously. That'd be good.
Beautiful.
Well, you think about how people learn a language, right?
Correct.
Have you ever I've tried learning Spanish by traditional methods, failed miserably. But, if you want to learn Spanish, you go to Spain, you go to a place where no one speaks English, and you immerse yourself. You struggle to start with, right? Because you have to, it's meaningful. Next thing you know, you can speak the language in the way it's supposed to be spoken.
Love it.
So I think that's the interesting part of it.
Yeah. I spoke to someone on the podcast a few weeks ago, and I think, and he's my speaker coach. So what he shared was that the body absorbs, and so his advice to his younger self was, I think, or something like that, where he said that just don't try to learn everything, just be present to everything, and your body will start to absorb it. I think that's very in line.
Similar idea, very similar idea. I'm with him on that.
Yeah. Love that. Awesome. This was such an insightful conversation, Shawn. Thank you for sharing all the stories and sharing all the stories with us. And I think what's really important for anyone who's wanting to go down that path is to learn to be vulnerable. I think that, to me, and Brené Brown speaks to it in beautiful ways. But I think that's the first step. You got to be okay with being vulnerable in front of an audience and to yourself to then embark on any journey of learning anything.
Indeed. That's a key part of it, I think.
Awesome.
Comes back right full circle of that confidence element.
Absolutely. It does.
Yeah.
It does. Awesome. Thank you for your time today, Shawn. I hope the listeners get value out of it. And look forward to seeing you very soon.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a wrap for today's episode of the Ignite Neurons podcast. If you found value in this, here's what I recommend. Take out a paper or a diary and just put down one thing that you can change about your life because you listen to this podcast. I'd really appreciate if you could share that in the comments below, because I'd love to see how it's impacting you or not. If you're on YouTube and watching this, then like, share, and subscribe, and please make this wisdom go viral. And if you're someone who loves your podcast on the go, then Spotify and Apple Podcasts are your go-to places, or wherever you're listening to this, just like, share it with a friend, and leave a comment, because I'd love to engage, love to have a conversation with you. Until next time, till we meet again, keep those neurons ignited, stay curious, keep learning, be someone who embraces a growth mindset, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.